Hey guys, welcome back to more homeowner association stories. In this video, an HOA broke into my home and confiscated my guns, claiming that they are police and that they have a right to take them away. Let's dive right into the video to see what happened. So I was living in an HOA a couple of years ago that took things further than I would have ever imagined to happen in my neighborhood. For some backstory, the HOA board before them were all getting older and one by one stepping down and giving up the positions to younger people that seemed to all want the position for the control and not to actually help any of the families involved. They started making new stricter rules, claiming that it was keeping us safer, but to me it felt more and more like I was living in some kind of police state, constantly being watched by them as they waited for somebody to break one of their rules just so they could get money from us. I'm aware that most of these other HOA stories take place in America and the law there might be a little better regarding what an HOA can and cannot do. I live in a country in South America though, and here the HOAs get a lot more freedom. Either because they tend to give money and bribe police, or the police themselves are just too busy to care about it. Sometimes an HOA does not seem any better than a gang just controlling a neighborhood and extorting money from people. I was part of a good one until the new people took over and just seemed to care about themselves. The five main enforcers for the leader of the HOA would ride up and down the streets on motorcycles wearing jackets that claimed they were security. They would tell kids to stop playing football out in the yards and that they would break something and be in big trouble. They told old ladies to not plant vegetable gardens unless they were willing to give half of whatever grew to the HOA. They were just horrible people and I was not happy living under them with my wife and kids, but we didn't have anywhere else to go. So I was dealing with it and hoping to stay under the radar and one day move or hope that somebody better took over. Well, instead the HOA tried to make a new rule that I knew was not legal to begin with, and I did not want them to do. They were basically going door to people claiming they had to be let in so they could do an inspection and make sure that the inside of our homes was following all the rules. They got to my door and I was not about to let them in with 3 young kids upstairs and my wife in the kitchen, plus I knew if I let them in they would take anything valuable they wanted. HOA, you need to open the door and let us in to inspect it. Me, you don't have the right to enter my home. I'm refusing to let you in. HOA said, our HOA police officers have the right to search your house. I knew they were not actually police, but they had started calling themselves that to further scare people. Me, leave now. You cannot come into my home just to take a look around. HOA, for this house we have direct orders. The HOA president has banned firearms in the community. We need to come in and search for them as you're a known gun owner. Having guns where I live is not really uncommon, by the way. I don't do anything illegal with them, but I have a few guns that I do legally own, a large hunting rifle, a small handgun, and a shotgun I also use for hunting purposes. All of which are kept locked away so that the kids have no ability to gain access to them. Me, my guns are legal and the HOA cannot make the decision to take them away. Now get away from my property. HOA, we're gonna search that house one way or another, just you wait. They left and I was stuck with their threat and a whole lot of worry about what might happen in the future. If they break in, I could call the police, but there's no guarantee that they show up in time or if the HOA is bribing them to stay out of their business. It got so complicated that sometimes even my head spins with what the world has become. A couple nights later, it was about 2 in the morning and we were woken up by the front door being busted down. The men, now wearing bulletproof vests and trying to cover their faces, started screaming that they were police and for us to get on the ground. They all had guns and were pointing them at all of us, even my 3-year-old little girl. I know they wanted me to not know who they were, but I was paying attention and I knew exactly who it was and that they were not police. I got a policy where I don't try and fight somebody that has a gun pointed at my family. That is just not gonna happen. They found where I kept the guns and instead of even asking me for the keys, they just took the entire box that the guns were stored in with them. As if they thought they were being clever and I couldn't guess what it was the HOA doing this and not the actual police. Which again might seem strange, but here it can happen where it is police doing this kind of thing. They also stole some gold jewelry that my wife had and my watch before leaving. Of course they couldn't leave without turning to us, guns still pointed, opening their dumb mouth. HOA police, we are confiscating all of these items as they go against the HOA rules and create a bad environment. Me, can you tell me why they are being confiscated when I legally own all of that stuff? HOA guy, guns and fancy items can be associated with crime, so the president is confiscating all of it to create a crime-free neighborhood. I did not want to respond again because he seemed to be getting angry and there was zero point in reasoning with him. We both knew that this line was a lie that he was forced to rehearse. The HOA president just wanted some guns and nice things to either pawn off for money or even keep for himself. It was abuse of power, but I just wanted these guys out of my house before they could do any more damage. My kids were crying and scared out of their minds because of what happened. The door was busted right off the hinges and I would have to buy a new one the next day and leave my house open and exposed for the rest of the night. I had a thought and got into my car without putting the lights on. I drove to where I knew the HOA guys usually hung out and managed to get some photos of them more clearly with my gun box and the HOA president. I knew that if I wanted to make sure they could not buy their way out of this, I need to have some solid evidence. The next day, I went to the police and filed a report explaining what had happened. Once they had heard that the HOA guys were pretending to be police, that is when they actually got interested in the case and wanted to investigate things. I think that's something universal that will get people in trouble and real cops riled up. If you pretend to be a cop when you are not one, I know that they can get pretty angry and want to retaliate. I gave them the pictures and they took down my story and told me that they would get back to me. Of course, I also wanted to press charges against the men for breaking into my house and for robbery, plus I was suing the HOA board later as a whole because of the photo I had proving that the president told them to go and do this. Of course, they all denied it ever happening, but the police were angry about being impersonated, so their probable plan for a bribe was not gonna end up working out. The HOA's main place got raided and my guns were found and brought in as more evidence against them. I think the funny part is that later in court, the HOA president tried to claim that these were his guns and I stole them from him the night before. Well, thankfully I had the paperwork showing when I had gotten them and that they had been in my name for years. So then he tried to argue that his nickname was the same as my actual name and that they were really his. It was not working though, and I think that they offered the president some type of deal that at least kept him out of jail for as long as the others were. It meant that he had to admit what he did, but that the 5 guys were the only ones that actually broke into the house and took anything. He was the mastermind behind it, but he did not technically steal anything, so by telling on his own friends he managed to save his butt a little bit. They were all going to jail, but the 5 that broke in were the ones that were going to do more time than anybody else. The HOA was gonna need to pay me for the damage that they caused, meaning buying me a new door. Luckily, they had not managed to go and sell my guns or other items on the black market or anything like that, so I was able to have them returned to me with no damage. Thank God for small favors. With all of these guys going to jail though, it raised the question of who was gonna take control of the HOA now. It was unmanned and now had kind of a dirty reputation because of what they did. Nobody wanted to take over and be confused as being associated with those guys or be the next ones that ended up in jail. The solution to this was actually genius in my opinion, so all of these older men who had run the board before decided to take their old roles back. This made people feel instantly safe because they knew that these men would never do anything to harm them. The first thing they did was remove all of the new rules that everybody hated and worked on rebuilding things a little bit. It took about 4 months for things to settle down before they made their next move. They had all stepped down from the HOA again, but this time decided to take it with them and just shut the whole thing down. They told us that we knew enough to be good people and we did not need a group trying to make sure that we are taking care of our own community. And yeah, ripe stars, as the saying goes, the best HOA is an HOA that just got shut down. No doubt about that. And if you enjoy the HOA stories, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video, since I would very much appreciate that. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. I'm a landlord, which means I own a bunch of apartments that people live in. One of those people is Karen, and yes, that's her actual name, which is pretty ironic. She's been living in one of my places for about 6 months now, and she has been the biggest headache for me. She's always got something to complain about. I mean, sure, I want my tenants to be happy, but Karen takes it to a whole new level. And it is not just me that she's got a problem with. The poor maintenance staff, they've become her punching bags for every frustration she has. I've heard stories about how rude she can be to them, and every time I confront her about it, she pins the blame on the staff. And when the staff ignores her because she's so damn rude, she complains to me how I don't have good management. It's a frickin' circle, and it irritates me so much to deal with it. Though lately, dealing with Karen has become an even bigger headache. It's not just the constant complaints anymore, it's the struggle to get her to pay the rent on time. I think it started like 3 months back when she started being late in paying her dues. I find myself calling and messaging her for weeks before she finally coughs up the money, and even then it's after a good minute of going back and forth how she won't run away with the money and needs some time, and how I should be patient because she is a good tenant. She is far from a good tenant though, and this just makes her worse for me. Dealing with her is way too much work, and none of my other tenants are like this. It got me thinking about evicting her because she was just too much of a problem rather than profit, and I also have offers from much better tenants that won't have me going back and forth only to get my due amount. Just when I thought things cannot get any crazier with Karen, she hits me with a text. Her rent is due, and instead of me calling her about it, she demands that I rush over because someone has apparently broken into her apartment. I was taken aback because nothing like this had ever happened before in all my years as a landlord. Also, the building is located at a rather safe part of the city, and break-ins are very rare, but I still listen to her and get into my car. On my way over, I call up my security guards to check in. They tell me that they did not hear any commotion from Karen's place, but assured me that they will keep a watchful eye. That is weird, and I try calling Karen to get any update on the situation, but she is not picking up. When I finally arrive, Karen opens the door and immediately accuses me of being the thief. I'm so confused it takes a few minutes to process it. I own the place, why would I break into it? But Karen is adamant, pointing fingers and raising her voice. I ask her to explain what happened, and she starts going on about how I must have a copy of her keys and how convenient it is that the break-in happened when her rent is due. I really want to point out that yes, it's very convenient how I stole from her when her rent is due, but instead I suggested calling the police to sort this out because I have no desire of going in circles with this Karen. I know it will just give me more headaches, but Karen still hesitates. It is as if she doesn't want the police involved, so I start to wonder if this is just another tactic to distract from the rent issue, which is honestly not that surprising considering her track record. I'm about to call the police on my own when Karen suddenly pulls out a taser and threatens to use it on me if I don't confess to breaking into her place. I try my best to stay calm, explaining that yes, I have a master key as the landlord, but I would never stoop so low as to steal from my own property. Karen, however, is not listening. She starts saying that I hate her and I want her gone, so I'm bullying her and annoying her so she moves out on her own. Woman, I'm the freaking landlord. I don't need to do all that to remove you. But of course, she does not care, and before I can try to run down the stairs, this jerk of a woman fires the taser at me. I immediately collapse, but thankfully the security guards are on their way up. They find me, help me stabilize, and keep Karen at bay. Once I'm okay, I waste no time and call the police immediately. The police arrive and I quickly explain the absurd situation to them. Karen, however, continues to insist that I'm the thief. She starts recounting all the time I've come over to her apartment and how I always look around her place suspiciously. She gives the police the list of everything that's missing and says that the break-in happened when she was out this morning. When they turn to me, I tell them that I have been in my office since this morning and they can call my place of work for proof. Karen then tries to accuse me of forcefully kicking her out by doing all this, but the police thankfully don't buy into her story. They see through the lack of evidence on her part and the fact that I have alibis for the supposed break-in. As the police officers assess the situation, they decide to take action against Karen. Her use of a taser is not taken lightly and she is arrested on charges of assault with a deadly weapon. Clearly Karen did not see it coming because she starts making a scene. While Karen is being detained, I decide to go through the security camera footage with one of the police officers. The footage reveals Karen sneaking around that very morning, hiding items in the basement only to later find them missing, seemingly setting me up for the alleged theft. All of those items match the ones on the list she provided. I thought the ordeal was over now because we have proof of her lies, but the police officer insisted on reviewing more footage. For some time we don't see anything, but then we review the cameras of the common area and hallways, and it turns out she had been stealing packages from other tenants and pocketing money left in the common area. The police then ask if I want to press charges, and I obviously say yes, though Karen threatens me that she will make sure I pay for my crimes. At the trial, the security camera footage is presented as evidence against Karen. She tries to plead that she is being framed and that the other tenants are in on this scheme, but all of that investigation leads to nothing. Even the maintenance staff testifies for her rude behavior and how she sometimes sabotaged them when they were working to extract money from them. I did not know about this, but it sounds like Karen. Later, Karen's neighbor, a young college student, said how he once had his Amazon package missing, and when he confronted Karen about it, she refused any knowledge about it. But when she was taking out her trash, she accidentally dropped the box and he could clearly see his address on the package. This incident happened almost 5 months back, and Karen never admitted of her crimes even when he showed her the evidence. So it was clear that the theft was something this woman almost had a habit of. The judge, taking into account the premeditated nature of her crimes, her continued actions and the harm that she caused to multiple tenants, convicted Karen of assault, theft and fraud, for which the judge sentenced her to 2 years in prison. Karen pled to lessen the sentence, but that plea was rejected swiftly. She was also asked to immediately have her belongings taken out of the apartment and have her lease terminated, which I was all too happy to do. While this was not how I thought of getting rid of her, I'm happy she is gone now. And the next one is a very long malicious compliance story. However, before we get to that, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post a comment, because that would help me tremendously. So I work at a hotel as a night auditor, and this malicious compliance begins with a small bit of information I was told when I was initially hired for this position. When I interviewed for the position, and this is very important later on, I was told by the HR lady that the hotel paid a bonus, $100 for each foreign language I spoke well enough to serve our guests. Management cleared my $100 for speaking English after I passed through their evaluation period. My main language is Portuguese. At first I was glad to be working in the night shift, mostly because my colleague then, Mr. Castillo, was from Guatemala, so whenever any guests that spoke Spanish showed up, he handled it, and in turn I handled any English-speaking foreigners. Naturally, he did a lot more work since the amount of Spanish-speaking guests we receive is significantly larger than our English-speaking ones. Meanwhile, Mr. Castillo was in the process of learning English and I had taken an interest in Spanish, so we helped each other out. Not long after, Mr. Castillo got himself a job paying several times over what the hotel did and sadly left me. My new colleague, a newly promoted bellboy, did not speak English, though he could understand some, and did not speak Spanish at all. In fact, he did not even try to improve any of his language skills, while I slowly kept improving my Spanish, trying to use more and more of it every day to serve our dear guests. As of the start of this month, I spoke to our front desk manager and asked him in plain Spanish what did I have to do exactly to receive the $100 bonus for speaking Spanish. He was surprised but said nothing more, since the front desk got busy with checkouts and my shift was up, but a few days later he mentioned that he spoke to HR and informed them that I was speaking Spanish well enough to receive my bonus, and now he was just waiting to hear back from them. A few days later, the HR lady asked me what size shirt I wore, since they were gonna be ordering new uniforms in the coming weeks, and took the opportunity to ask her about my bonus for Spanish, and she mentioned that they were talking with our director about it. A day later, she informed me that they would not be paying me the bonus for a foreign language since it was on file that I was already receiving it. I replied that I was receiving a bonus for English, not Spanish, and she said she would speak to the director again, and within a few days all would be made well. Now, I'm not really in a hurry to get my bonus, but it would be nice if they had cleared it already, as it would show up on my next paycheck, but guess what? They didn't. Our director talked to HR again, and my boss told them that even though I am serving our dear Spanish-speaking guests in Spanish, I don't in fact speak Spanish. I am far from fluent, but I can explain how the hotel works, direct guests to where they need to be, and assist them with what they need, be it finding a pharmacy at 3 AM, getting a cab to go out and get drinks, or even hire ladies of the night. But apparently, it's not good enough for our director, and my manager said that he cannot really afford to fight him on it. Okay, no biggie I guess, maybe we'll try again next year when I can speak a little better, I thought. However, the cruel and unforgiving gods of the hotel industry gave me the perfect opportunity to strike back. Earlier last week we received a large group of 30+ Spanish-speaking tourists, which in addition to our normal occupancy meant that we were effectively sold out for the week. Big groups are usually a minor inconvenience when you are checking them in, but an even bigger problem when checking them out. Especially if they are one person per room, which means you basically have a huge load of rooms to check out one by one while an endless line forms in front of the front desk. 80+ checkouts are not unusual for our hotel on Friday mornings, but what 110 plus is a problem. Normally when the morning shift has a workload this big, our front desk manager comes in early to help, but he couldn't this time since he took a personal day since his mother fell ill. That left our director with only one choice: to ask the night audit to stay late and help until our reservations people clocked in and could then replace us at the front desk. See, my colleague doesn't like staying late, especially since he works a second job with his father in the afternoon, meaning he only has the morning and early afternoon to sleep. I don't like staying late on Fridays because of the amount of checkouts, which means it will be forever before you can take a breath and even more so before you can leave. However, this time our director did not even ask my colleague and instead told me to stay late because we would have a sizable workload and about a third of it would require someone that spoke Spanish, or it would slow down everything to a crawl. I told him I would not be staying late that morning, and before I could get another word in, he started yammering about how I am wrong, how I should be more of a team player, and that he would be very grateful for it. Wanting to get back to my sleep, I told him to ask my colleague, and he said he couldn't, that they needed me, and when I asked him why, he clearly stated, "We need 2 Spanish speakers that morning to make sure everything goes okay with the checkouts." Not one for missing an opportunity to get payback, I replied, "Sorry boss, I don't speak Spanish." And I turned off my phone and went back to sleep. Update to the story: sorry for holding out on the aftermath. I wrote this during my shift, and as I was putting on the finishing touches, we had a server crash and I spent the next hour and a half trying to restore our backups and get the camera system up again. Next update, aftermath. After I woke up and turned my cell phone back on, I had several missing calls from the hotel and 2 missing calls from our front desk manager, good guy. I called back the hotel, but the afternoon shift picked up and they didn't know anything, so I called my manager's phone. He answered and asked me what was going on because the director was furious about me hanging up on him and that I was refusing to work. I explained to him the situation in regards to my bonus for speaking Spanish, and since the hotel was trying to hold out on me, I was gonna withhold performance. Anyone who's ever worked customer service knows how much damage withholding performance can do, even if it is just a little. In the end, my manager begged me to stay until our reservations people came in at 8 AM. My shift ends at 7:20 AM. I agreed on the condition that I would not check out anyone who spoke Spanish. He reluctantly accepted and said he would back me up in the following crap storm that happened. What happened was that the group came down for breakfast precisely at 6:40 AM, finished at 7:10 AM give or take, and went back to their room to collect their belongings. At this time, the 2 front desk attendants of the morning shift had arrived, as well as our bellboy, plus there was me and my colleague waiting to punch out and go. We had already started checking people out, and this day was particularly busy. We had 3 or 4 people waiting to be checked out, and it does not help that we only have 3 computers for 4 people to work with another computer for us to check the cameras. When 7:20 AM came up, my colleague quickly picked up his things and left, and I took over his spot. At this time, the first few people in the group started coming down, and they already had to wait since we were all checking out other people. A few minutes later I got the first one, but I told them that I couldn't check them out since I don't speak Spanish, and I asked them to wait for my colleagues to become available. In the end, I ended up refusing service to 10 or so people, which started forming a line right in front of the front desk. Which only grew since other guests assumed that they were all in line to be checked out. My colleagues on the morning shift were not happy at all. The guests were less than satisfied, and when the first of our reservations people showed up at 8 AM, I logged out, punched out, and went home. By that time, there was a 20+ line of people waiting to be checked out by 2 overworked receptionists, only one of which spoke Spanish. In the ensuing crap storm that happened, the hotel's director arrived at 8:30 AM in an attempt to minimize the anger of the human centipede who formed in the front desk, started chatting with the guests and otherwise trying to distract them so they would be less angry and avoid giving the hotel a poor review. I got a mild chewing out by my manager for poor work ethic instead of being written up. True to his word, he backed me up when the director called him and HR for a meeting regarding my actions. You cannot demand someone speak a language that you know they don't, right? I still haven't gotten my bonus for speaking Spanish, and I let my manager know that I will not be speaking any Spanish while on the job until they give in and give me my hard-earned bonus. Final update: so due to the number of comments asking about how the bonus works, I will just post it here. It is a monthly bonus, and the way to hotel pays it out is by adding it into the base salary instead of specifically outlining it on a separate item on our pay stub. This means that it is straight up a pay raise, and as such it interacts with other things that go into our paycheck that use our base salary to be calculated. This means that the $100 bonus easily snowballs into being $150 to $160 when you take into account the 20% we get paid for working nights, 10% for handling live money, plus overtime, plus paid time off, plus vacations. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I gotta say, that was really an XXL malicious compliance story, and I'm always surprised and I'm always fascinated how passionate people are about getting malicious compliance. I can only imagine how satisfying it must feel to get something like this. Then again, as I mentioned in another video before, sometimes I'm curious about the consequences of doing something like this at your workplace. I suppose it could also easily end up in animosity and could create trouble for you. Anyway, if you ever had malicious compliance at your own workplace, please let me know what happened and how it went. Anyway, the next one is titled The Life of a Nurse. Being a travel nurse in the operating room has its benefits. The pay, the ability to take time off between assignments, and the bits of malicious compliance that makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside. So I've been at this hospital for 2 months. I've worked with this particular surgeon a handful of times, but it's always been the same procedure, so I know what he wants for every step of the case. I am about to start applying skin prep, which means another layer of antimicrobial security to prevent post-op infection. To where the surgeon is going to operate, he always wants the armpit, front shoulder and breast/chest of the specific side prepped. We are operating on the patient's right side. They are already asleep and their right arm is padded and secured on an arm board. Before I start prepping, the scrub tech immediately says, "You need to undo their arm," from the board, so that you can prep the whole arm. I tell them no, the surgeon wants it prepped this way, the arm stays on the board. This scrub tech had not done this case with this doctor in quite some time either, but they still decided to explain how the whole arm should be prepped for this procedure. I ignored them. And by the way guys, I already know before this story even plays out that you should never mess with the nurse in question. Trust me guys, messing with a nurse never benefits you. But let's see how it plays out. I begin my prep. Less than a minute later, the charge nurse comes in to log into a portable X-ray device. Us travelers don't often get credentials for those, and the scrub tech decides to ask the charge nurse how the surgical site should be prepped for this case right in front of me. The charge nurse backs up the scrub tech and tells me I should be prepping the whole arm in addition to the sites that I mentioned earlier. I protested. Well, but Dr. X does not want that. He always wants the same areas prepped and draped accordingly. The charge nurse was not budging and they demand I unfasten the arm and do it their way instead. I sigh and say okay. Cue my malicious compliance. I prep the whole arm and I am holding it in my sterile glove while waiting for the drapes and stockinette to be applied. All of a sudden, the most glorious thing happens. The surgeon arrives with the charge nurse still in the room and says, "Did you prep the whole arm?" he asked me. "Yep." "Why did you do that? You've been here 2 months and how do you not remember the prep by now?" "I was told to prep it this way." "By who? Who told you to do it this way?" The surgeon was pissed due to this delay. As a traveler, I've learned to take the heat for making small mistakes, and I was contemplating taking the fall for this so that we could just move on with the rest of the day. But before I could speak, my charge nurse was actually humble and admitted that they told me to prep the whole arm. The doc looked at me. "Did you tell them how I prefer it to be done?" I did. The doc turned back to the charge nurse and proceeded to lambast her for delaying the case. The scrub tech just stared blankly at the wall, but I didn't look or listen. I just stood there enjoying the moment with the biggest crap-eating grin under my mask. It's a nice day when someone else proves you were right. Needless to say, I did not renew my contract at that hospital. And the next one is titled, Neighbor Wants Access to My Property. Hey everyone, we recently purchased an attached row house on a corner lot, meaning we only have one neighbor to the right of us and there are 4 units in total. There is another house that faces our backyards that has a fence installed facing B, C, D's backyards, but not ours. All units have front yards though. After having a land survey completed, we began to renovate our backyard, including installing fencing to close in the backyard and provide some privacy, as it had previously been completely open. We spoke to town zoning, which confirmed fencing requirements. Under 6 feet requires no permit, posts can be placed right up to the property line, and our fence contractor began to work on getting it up. By closing in our backyard, it also completely closed in our neighbor B, as the abutting properties to her already had fences installed. Our neighbor B rents the property, and the landlord had previously asked if we would be open to installing a gate between the 2 properties. As there is a shared basement door unit divided by the property line, our door's on one side and theirs is on their side, and he would hate for us to have to remove our panel if they needed to replace a hot water heater or anything in the basement. Being new neighbors and wanting to be considerate, we we agreed but said that the gate would be locked. We consulted our town's zoning and fire marshal departments and everybody said that we did not have to provide any access to our neighbor, but we decided to leave the gate up since we had already paid for it to be installed, but we locked the gate from our side. There is another gate entrance at the front of our driveway, which also has a locking mechanism so people cannot simply open the gate and enter our backyard. We told the landlord that we would have both gates locked and that B was not to enter our property and that the only reason we would open the gate for the landlord if he asks for permission in advance. Today B came and confronted us about why she cannot access our backyard. We explained that it is our private property that we own and that we are not required to allow her access to it. She tried guilt-tripping us by saying that she lives alone and if there's an emergency she will not be able to escape. Again, we explained that both gates are locked for our privacy and protection, to protect things in our backyard and shed and to allow us to have a safe space to be outside. And that even if the attached gate was not locked, she would still be trespassing on our property and remain locked in just in our backyard instead of hers. She was pretty heated about it, and while I understand the situation she is in, she chose to rent out an interior unit that is surrounded by other people who own their properties and can do whatever they like with them. We are obviously not obligated to keep our backyard open, just in case there happens to be an emergency at some point and she needs to escape, right? Or does this make us the a-holes? And yeah, Ripe Stars, I would love to hear from you what you think about this. Do you think that OP is the a-hole for not keeping her property open for her neighbor in case there is an emergency or not? Let me know what you think. And Reddit thought the following: not the a-hole, it's your property and that's all there is to it. If she's unhappy, she can look to rent somewhere else. Comment number 2, locked in, LOL. It is a 5-foot fence, not the walls of Minas Tirith. If she cannot hop a fence, I guess she could keep a small ladder in her yard for extreme emergencies, but she's making up scenarios that will never happen. Clearly not the a-hole. And yeah, guys, obviously I would agree with Reddit here. OP is clearly not the a-hole, and the neighbor cannot dictate OP what she or he has to do with their own property. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.